Ahoy hoy gang! If this is your first time with us, welcome! And if you're joining us from a previous video, hey, we love to see it and I hope you're doing well. It's season 13! The final season of the original run of King of the Hill. It's hard to believe we've come this far and only have around 25 episodes until we're done with such a prolific series. We still have some very high highs and very low lows to cover, but looking back at everything we talked about to get to this point is just surreal. We've seen story arcs, seasons centered around themes, and even Bobby going nuts. We had legendary musical and acting talents lend their voices to this down-home classic. And now here we are at the season that didn't even air in its entirety on Fox. And so, without further ado, for the last time I must ask, what worked? What failed? What Myspace flash mobs will be curtailed? There's no other way that can be seen. It's time to careen into season 13. Bill has a wee bit of a diabetic coma and is shocked when he finds out he's got adult onset diabetes, and he blames his genes instead of his diet, or his lack of exercise, or anything. Nope, his genes are easier. Hank vows to help Bill fight his stress eating habits and learn to eat healthier. Bill doesn't even last 24 hours before he's right back in the hospital, getting a doctor that just does not have it in him to lie to Bill, and tells him that if he doesn't get his diabetes under control, he'll lose his legs, so he might as well get a wheelchair and get it early. Bill gives up and just uses his wheelchair to get around now. Ha. Bill goes out to the park and runs into a bunch of paraplegic athletes. He meets Thunder, played by fitness guru Jake Steinfeld, who encourages him to join in and take control of his life. Just because he can't walk doesn't mean he can't live. I'll say this, Jake Steinfeld is a great first guest star and does a wonderful job of bringing this confident take-charge athlete to life. Thunder and Bill go out dancing and Bill starts to get his confidence back. There is a slight B-story of Bobby trying to trade the healthy food his mom made for him for his friend's food because he's tired of eating healthy, like this is some kind of Mark Twain book. Fun fact, Mark Twain's real name was Samuel Clemens. The less fun facts I have in an episode review, the better the episode is. Bill ships up to Boston and flogs some mollies while Coach Kleehammer gives one of the best lines in the entire series. However, after drunkenly celebrating with his crew, he gets up to use the bathroom, shocking them all that he can totally walk and never bothered to mention it. He's understandably ostracized. When he tries to prove he has diabetes, he finds out that through hard work and exercise, he actually got his diabetes under control. Bill tries to eat sugar to give him his diabetes back, and Thunder consoles him and has a heart-to-heart. Now, I don't like how they told Bill he beat diabetes here. You don't beat diabetes. Getting it under control to the point you can maintain yourself through healthy eating and exercise as opposed to insulin injections? Oh, absolutely. But the man is still 3 chocodiles and a Yoo-hoo chaser away from a diabetic coma. You don't just click your heels and it goes away. Anyway, he goes to have some friendly words with his doctor, and the episode ends with the nurse not hearing a thing as the doctor gets some constructive criticism. Diabetic shock isn't an episode I'd start a season with, and I think it almost serves as a detriment to the episode. If it came later in the season, I think it'd have a better fit, but for what it is, Diabetic Shock is a perfectly serviceable Bill episode. It's not the best Bill episode, but at least he's not being home-wrecked or dealing with massive debt. Diabetic Shock is a low-sugar, high entertainment 7 out of 10. Bobby is taking Earth Sciences and wants to plant a tree for extra credit. Buck readily hands out cards for someone to win Strickland Propane, so they have to deal with the fallout of Buck dumping empty propane tanks in the river, and he wants to go green to help their public image. Hank brings Bobby in to help them be more green, and I gotta say this would have been a great episode to have Mr. McKay from It's Not Easy Being Green return. With or without Paul Giamatti, but obviously with would work better. Instead, Bobby's teacher isn't really around at all, and a company is just listening to a kid and his pamphlets. The episode just feels like a very special episode about the importance of going green and how it's not all repurposing water and going off the grid. However, some of their tips have aged like milk, like turning off your monitor when you're not using your computer instead of, just turning your computer off. Buck gets restless and starts to lose it, even going pantsless at work, all because he can't take going green. Dale brings up carbon offsets and wants to sell the carbon being offset by Bobby and Joseph planting trees for the environment. Dale wants to profit off of child labor as he sends them off to get people to buy carbon offsets and pretends to plant the trees. I appreciate that Hank and Bobby both genuinely care about the environment and want to do the actual progressive work, but Bobby got tricked by Dale. Meanwhile, Buck is organizing an eco-friendly concert event to win him some earthy girls. And when they go to visit Strickland Woods, where the concert is supposed to be, they find out Dale never planted a single tree, and it understandably devastates Bobby. Messing with Bill, okay, there is at least something there in his twisted little mind. But to manipulate his own son and Bobby like that? I know it's not above Dale, but it's still skeevy he did it at all. Dale and Buck try and fix things by using an old gun club members' trees for their offsets so he can use the land for a concert. Bobby is disillusioned with saving the environment as Buck seems to get away with everything without any consequences. Hank even goes on stage and tries to come clean, but the audience just isn't having it as Big Mountain Fudge Cake walks onto stage, which is interesting since I'm pretty sure they broke up like 3 seasons ago, but I guess they're back together again for some reason. Hank and Bobby secure the tree and credits roll. There's no resolution. Again, I guess the message is just people care more about the messaging than they do saving the environment, which, man, that's some look-up levels of symbolism, and it's kind of funny. I wonder if Mike Judge would ever make a show about that. You know, a bunch of people that seem to care more about the environment but never actually do anything about it. The people that seem too good to be true, a good family, if you will. Earthy Girls Are Easy is a frustrating episode. I feel like it's supposed to be frustrating to make viewers care more about the environment, but narratively it just falls apart in the third act. Earthy Girls Are Easy is a mean green 5 out of 10. Hank and the gang fix up Dottie's place for her nephew for curb appeal while Luanne does a maternity shoot. You know, that way everyone is doing something. Turns out that Ted Wasanasong is actually the one that bought Dottie's old house, and he proceeds to knock it down and put up a giant McMansion. I'll say this, it's small, but I'm glad to have Lucky back. His whammy bar keeps me sane. The neighborhood struggles to adjust with all construction and steadily gets pushed out. Hank goes to fight the home with the ordinance committee, including Ed Burnett, played by returning great Chris Elliott, which would actually make this episode something special. You see, they meet an old bylaws archivist named Edgar Hornsby, who looks for any reason to get rid of the McMansion. Edgar Hornsby would be played by Bob Elliott, Chris Elliott's father, and one of the clerks would be played by Ashley Elliott, Chris Elliott's daughter, who's been in past episodes. It's not an isolated incident, but it's just really cool seeing 3 generations of Elliott in one episode of an animated comedy. It's the small things. It could have just been a gimmick, but honestly, the 3 of them actually bring a ton of personality to the episode in their own unique ways. Bob Elliott delivers Edgar's lines like a true veteran actor, and Ashley Elliott is inspired as one of the clerks that thought Edgar had been dead for a decade. Honestly, the weakest is Chris Elliott, but he didn't have a ton to work with, and even if he's the weakest, it definitely doesn't mean he's bad at all. Those overglorified Snapple facts are about as deep as this episode gets. The McMansion starts to creak and sway in the intense winds and begins to crumble. Hank and the gang, in order to protect their property, demolish parts of the beastly McMansion in the most anime scene of the whole show. Big Shobute must die vibes. Ted naturally sues them for the destruction of the home he's gonna sell and wasn't expecting him to bring every receipt imaginable. The judge would actually be played by Jerry Lambert, who, if you want a real time machine, just search Jerry Lambert Netflix commercials. Edgar gets called to testify, and he defends Hank with a bylaw that sure enough exonerates Hank and the neighborhood since they were just looking out for their homes. Ted sells the lot to the city, and they put up a substation in the neighborhood, which Hank and the gang builds a house around, which really doesn't seem safe to surround a substation with wood, but that's just me. Square-Footed Monster is an anxious episode that starts, then stalls, until it's finally crossing the finish line. But I'll say this, it has a thorough conclusion. Square-Footed Monster isn't perfect, but it's a fun episode that has a lineage of talent in it and actual effort put into the writing. It isn't going to be in anyone's top 10 episodes, but it's definitely not in their least favorite either, and frankly, that's good enough. Square-Footed Monster is a sturdy as plywood, 8 out of 10. Hey, it's actually very wonderfully outdated episode. Donna, the accountant at Strickland, the same one that robbed them blind, is bored and starts showing off Myspace after Hank loses a customer to Thatherton and their shared love of Weezer. Donna then sets up a Strickland Myspace page where they have to make racy content to build their audience, which understandably upsets Hank. Donna gets promoted to co-assistant manager as she manages the Myspace page while Hank does all the actual work. Donna goes crazy, takes over the Myspace page, and even sends a flash mob after Strickland Propane. Like, sure, no one uses MySpace anymore, but replace it with TikTok or Instagram, and the commentary is still pretty fresh. It's really more just about your digital presence, and it's wild how forward-thinking it is about the ideas. Plus, you have Peggy going around MySpace as Ted Danson. I don't know why, but it's just so dumb, and yet during the MySpace era, there were so many fake actor profiles. It was very early mainstream non-dial-up internet. It was a wild westland out there. And see, you have all that, and I haven't even gotten into the B story. Dale takes Nancy to That's Amore, and when he finds out how expensive truffle is, he gets a truffle-sniffing pig, and Bobby falls in love with the pig and wants to go truffle hunting with Dale. The pig scarfs down some fun mushrooms, and while he chases the white rabbit and runs off, Bobby and Dale have to find him. It's going to be wild, and I am sure there's people that hate this episode as much as I love it, but this is genuinely one of my absolute favorites. The jokes are great, voice delivery is wonderful, like season 12 was rough in a lot of parts, but going through season 13, more often than not, the episodes are actually pretty good. You can tell they did put some amount of effort into finishing strong, even if they didn't know definitively this was the last season, and I don't know. Lost in MySpace felt like a modernized classic King of the Hill. It was a solid story that actually has a conclusion and a wonderful B story that is a perfectly balanced Dale epic. Lost in MySpace is a My Chemical Romance landing page launching 9 out of 10. I haven't talked much about Dennis Berkeley and his run as Principal Moss, but it needs to be said that Dennis Berkeley was a one-of-a-kind legend that, I don't know, he elevated a character that could have been just this dreary, depressed excuse of a man to actually have some kind of depth to him. He grew up with Hank, he's a man that's been beat down by the system, and he's just trying to get through the day. No one said he wasn't skeevy, but he does it well. And honestly, this is probably the best Principal Moss episode of all time. I kept thinking all these Principal Moss episodes were earlier and I was excited to see them all, but they're actually all in this season, which is just wild. Bobby is struggling in school and scoring low, which Hank thinks is Bobby just being lazy. Principal Moss finds out that they're failing the No Child Left Behind guideline since the kids can't pass the standardized tests, so the teachers start trying to hammer in extra tutoring. But when even that isn't working, Principal Moss has a solution. He takes all the lowest scoring students and puts them in the special needs division so they don't have to take the test, and bribes them with a trip to Arlen Land with the honors kids if they play along. A principal bribing his students. I love it. So many times you see the principal as a sort of caring, authoritative figure who, sure, they might be strict, but they do care deep down. Or you get something like Principal Lewis or Principal Shepard from American Dad and Family Guy, respectively, where they're just wild party animals. Principal Moss is just charismatically pathetic. Hank fights to get Bobby taken out of the special needs class, but ends up failing, and sure enough, Bobby and the other kids go on the trip with Dale as their parental guardian, which, what could go wrong there, and they use the log flume as a water slide. They get crammed school to prove that they can pass the test, and they're not special needs, and the school fails. Worse than the previous year. Just absolutely miserable showing. Principal Moss gets thrown on unpaid leave and sells J-Bone steaks. J-Bone. Gang, I know I am just absolutely ruining my non-existent credentials, but I adore this episode. I think it's just absolutely amazing. A 10 out of 10, personally. It's so great that the teachers in Moss have been developed like this, and I don't know, it feels unique. The teachers feel like they're actual people that are very aware rent is due on the first. It's a realistic portrayal of teachers, and I just genuinely love that. The episode never loses the plot. It knows exactly what it set out to do and does it masterfully. No Bobby Left Behind is a high honor roll 10 out of 10. Peggy hasn't sold a house in 6 months, housing crisis, but she wants to buy the family a new TV, and so she goes to Min. Min encourages her to invest her savings and make it earn for her, and shows that she watches the Dow Genius and follows his guidance. The Dow Genius is very obviously a play on Jim Cramer from Mad Money, which, I'd be baffled if he turned down a guest role on King of the Hill. It's just David Herman again. Peggy, Min, and Dale all struggle to find anything worth investing in when they run into Bill and realize he's the perfect consumer and start following him around to invest in whatever he buys, all while making sure he has no idea that they're researching him. Meanwhile, the family does get a brand new TV, and it is deafening. Bill is happy just to have people listening to him for a change, but sure enough, he figures out something is up at a tech expo and starts to panic. A very interesting display of observation bias that Dale goes very in-depth on, weirdly enough. Basically, if you know you're being watched, you're going to act differently than if you weren't. The funniest part is that it's a perfectly reasonable psychological idea, and it's presented by Dale. It's just, a broken clock is right twice a day sometimes, I guess. Well, Bill spirals when he can't make any right calls and proceeds to refinance his house and loses everything. Min, Peggy, and Dale try and scrounge up enough money to save Bill out of guilt, but it's nowhere near enough, and Bill just straight up files for bankruptcy. Like, the episode ends with Bill telling everyone how simple it is to start the process to file for bankruptcy. People are actively listening to him for once, and it's about how he had to do something so civilian. There's no, ho ho, you've won the lottery, here's all the money you lost. Gee, that sure is convenient, see you next Sunday at 7:30. No, he lost it all. He stole fuzzy lifting drink, he gets nothing. And he's the happiest he's been all episode. I know this is the part where I should tear the episode apart, but it's a really, really great little adventure. Min, Dale, and Peggy, I would argue, actually works better than Min, Nancy, and Peggy. I don't know. Dale just offers a different approach, and while this episode is one of the only times it happens, I really think it shines because the focus is split between the three, and the B story is just so inconsequential it allows the Bill story to be so devastating for him. Like, it's juxtaposed to the new plasma screen TV being a nightmare. It's wild to see where we've come from. A bill full of dollars is a stonks 10 out of 10. Hey, a guest star! Peggy signs up to be a greeter for new families to the area and takes Hank to meet the Cherish family. The father, Wesley Cherish, would be played by Andy Richter. Wesley and Hank team up to start up an Arlen chapter of the Order of the Straight Arrow, and Hank signs Bobby up so he can experience the fun of being an Arrow Scout. There are a few episodes this season that just make you scratch your head and wonder why. This is one of them. I know it was a long time ago, but remember back to season 1 in the episode where Bobby goes on a camping retreat with Hank and the gang participate in an Order of the Straight Arrow trip. Remember when Bobby bludgeoned the whooping crane and he kept giving thanks to nature and appreciated the world around him? Want to guess what the name of that episode is? The Order of the Straight Arrow. Easily one of the best early episodes of King of the Hill. Now in this episode, they're starting the chapter up again and Bobby's never done it before. I don't know at this point. I want to have an open mind, and I don't hate when you redo episodes, but you retcon one of the greatest episodes of the entire series for this? Wesley is a helicopter parent that makes sure his kids never run into danger. They do an indoor camping trip in a library where they make a fake plastic fire instead of a real one, and Wesley thinks Bobby is a bad influence because he plays video games. You having fun yet? Any of this funny for you? Hank tries to give the kids an authentic camping experience and sneak them away, but when Wesley's kids get cupcakes and bowled off into the woods, he gets understandably upset. The A story doesn't need to exist. I have heard Andy Richter give incredible vocal performances. He's Delmonico, for crying out loud. Here, he's just, he's fine. Granted, he doesn't have anything to work with. Wesley is just a boring character. The entire A story is just boring. It has stakes, sure, but you just don't care about them. There's no weight to it, which is really funny because the ironic thing about the episode is the B story is infinitely better, and I'm genuinely shocked that's the case. Luanne and Lucky begin the wedding gift shakedown to get practical gifts to prepare for their new arrival. I'll say it, and I'm pretty sure I get why, but Luanne has had the exact same character model ever since she announced her pregnancy. Now, I'm guessing they did that because they didn't have a guarantee that episodes they created would air in order due to football or other circumstances. Remember, Football Sunday would carry over into new episodes of King of the Hill all the time. It's not an issue anymore since it just has digital releases, but back then it was something to be concerned about. Why am I bringing this up now? You know, with Luanne running around with Lucky doing a shakedown? Oh, because she gives birth next episode. I get it, but knowing that's coming it feels a little jarring, but it's funny. I don't really care all that much. Tom Petty does a great delivery, and honestly, the B story makes Straight as an Arrow a merit badge earning 6 out of 10. Luanne is very, very pregnant all at once. She's getting ready for the baby shower, and Peggy preps her for what she should expect when she gives birth. However, lucky sister Myrna comes to the baby shower ready to bring an almost obsessive amount of prenatal wisdom. Myrna would be played outstandingly by acclaimed actress Paget Brewster. You probably recognize her most from Criminal Minds, but she is easily one of the funniest voice actors out there and has a comedic timing that is genuinely unrivaled. She's Bird Girl! And yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this episode, but she does a wonderful job in it. She and Peggy get along at first as they try and help Luanne and Lucky prep for bringing a new life into the world, and when Myrna goes more psychological and even hires an assistant/doula for a natural birth, Peggy tries to retaliate until Luanne puts her foot down, stands up for herself, and brings her baby girl into the world on her terms. And Gracie Margaret Kleinschmidt is born. I'm gonna be completely real. If we never saw Luanne and Lucky after this point, that might have been for the best. It's a perfect end for their stories. You can walk away satisfied that this is who Luanne is now. There doesn't need to be an episode later on that makes her insufferable. She's fine as she is. No, I spit in the face of the wheel of time. I reject this reality and substitute my own. I didn't even talk about the B story. Bill falls in love with the intercom girl at a fast food joint, and she's actually at a call center. She likes him too, and so he starts to obsess over her, ultimately deciding to drive out to the call center and meet her, and she's a 17-year-old girl. Why? What call center is hiring 17-year-olds too? It doesn't make sense. Have her be just some woman who sees Bill and goes, yeah, it's a no from me, dog. Just kinda unnecessarily cruel to the poor guy. Man didn't need the 1-2 punch to the gut, he was unconscious after the uppercut. The B story doesn't do anything. It doesn't even feel like an adequate buffer between A story segments. You could take it out and have more Lucky and Myrna interaction, and bing bang boom, we got an episode, people. Lucky see Monkey do in a vacuum isn't bad at all. If you've marathoned the show from the beginning, you're happy that Luanne is happy at this point. It's bittersweet, but it's good enough. She could do a lot worse than Lucky. She has her family, she has her support, she's got Hank and Peggy, and she'll be alright. Brittany Murphy did an incredible job bringing Luanne to life, and no matter what the writers did to her character, she brought her all every single time. Lucky See, Monkey Do is a heartfelt 8 out of 10. If you're sat down and given 5 episodes of any shows in existence to explain who you are to a stranger, what would you say? I don't know what 5 through 2 would be, but number 1 would be what happens at the National Propane Convention stays at the National Propane Convention. This episode rings in the very marrow of me bones. Buck is nominated to be inducted into the Hall of Flame and be able to wear the legendary rainbow blazer. When Buck makes the announcement, he asks Hank to introduce him, who accepts with glee and goes to Memphis with Buck and his family to make sure Buck stays out of trouble until the award ceremony. Bobby and Joseph run off and the rest of the gang just sort of floats around. Everything is going well until Buck notices another Strickland Propane and meets Ray Roy, his sometimes mentioned, always illegitimate son, played by returning legend Diedrich Bader. Buck finally meets his son. He finally has kin. And Ray Roy is just like him. Booze, women, and gambling are his 3 biggest vices, and sure enough, they run off to party dirty down in Memphis. Peggy tries to schmooze with the first ladies of Propane, and Hank gets drunk on Long Island iced teas and vomits on stage when he's supposed to be introducing Buck. Peggy goes to find Buck and Ray Roy and demand they make things right. Hank has always been there for Buck, and the one time Hank needs him, he isn't there. This is the culmination of Buck's entire story. He has his son, he's inducted into the Hall of Flame, but his adventure isn't over. Buck, Peggy, and Ray Roy scheme to compromise the committee and get Hank off the hook like only Buck can. Buck uses his Buck powers for the man that kept his business running through thick and thin. He gets Hank a rainbow flame blazer, and most important of all, he tells Hank he's earned it. The episode ends with Buck hopping in the car with Ray Roy and peeling out as Cats in the Cradle plays on. It shouldn't. It absolutely shouldn't. But this episode still, to this day, brings a tear to my eye. I know everyone has episodes of media that help shape them into who they are, even if they don't realize it, and I know this episode is one of those for me. Whether it just came into my life at the right time or just hit the right frequency for me, this is the episode I revisit the most. It's an episode I can almost recite from memory. There's nothing from top to bottom I'd change about this episode. Stephen Root gives an outstanding, and I mean outstanding, performance as Buck. Diedrich Bader has never phoned it in, and his Ray Roy is terrific. This is the biggest Propane episode of the series, and it feels like a great conclusion to the Strickland saga. What happens at the National Propane Convention stays at the National Propane Convention is a brilliantly burning 10 out of 10. I would skip this episode for years. I hated this story. I thought it was just the absolute worst, and I just adamantly refused. As the years went on, I knew I didn't watch the episode, but I couldn't for the life of me remember why. Then I had to do this marathon, and I think I've grown into loving this episode. Let's get the B story out of the way. Dale records himself trying to live in nature, a la Bear Grylls, Survivor Man, etc. He camps in his front backyard. It's good, dumb fun. The A story, Hank and Peggy go on a great relaxing night out where they just take it easy and take their time at dinner. They're laughing, they order the molten lava cake, they genuinely feel like two people in love with one another. Yeah, well, they forget to pick Bobby up and he's stuck at the mall after it closes. Hank and Peggy throw each other under the bus and Bobby tries to twist the situation so he can get whatever he wants from the two of them. Hank and Peggy figure out what Bobby is doing when he feels ignored and alone. So they decide to smother him with love to teach him a lesson. They're playing board games late into the night. They're waking him up in the morning and going all in on it. I think what I love most is that this feels like a season 1 Mike Judge episode. Hank and Peggy kill Bobby with kindness. That's such a human response. I know that sounds weird, but like Peggy isn't doing anything crazy because a family therapist said so. Hank isn't shaking his head and going, that boy ain't right. They're both upset they forgot Bobby, accidents happen, and then they turn around, work together, and shower Bobby with affection until he learns his lesson. You tell me what they did wrong with their punishment of Bobby. I'll wait. It's a human episode of King of the Hill. You could put real actors in and make it a sitcom episode with zero effort. Yes, just like that episode of 2.5 Men that I'm sure people are going to point out. Master of Puppets is fine. It's absolutely not the best episode of the season, but it's definitely not the worst either. I will take a perfectly fine episode like this any day. Master of Puppets, I'm Pulling Your Strings is a no-nonsense 7 out of 10. No as in the no Japanese puppetry style that Kankuro in Nar Uto uses and has like one fight throughout the entire run that he actually wins. Aha! It's time for the rematch game of the century. Every year, the Mustang players that beat Hank and the gang in the state championships decide to harass them and even bust into their homes to mock them. It's a move. Hank, in a fit of rage, challenges them to a rematch to settle things once and for all. Naturally, it's flag football because they're old now, and so Hank has to go and get the team back together. Principal Moss, Bill, Boomhauer, Dale, and even some out-of-state help from Phoenix. However, when they're practicing, the bulldozer cranks the gas a little too hard and smashes Hank's face in, breaking his nose and making him require immediate plastic surgery. When he gets his nose fixed, he's too afraid to practice or play because he doesn't want his nose to get broken. He doesn't want himself to get broken. Again, this on the surface feels like a whatever episode, but if you look just under the hood, there's something there. Hank gets a shot at redemption against the team that took everything from him. When he played them last time, after his showboating, he had a career-ending injury. Now, all these years later, he gets his nose broken and he's terrified of getting broken in that game again. There's actually a really wonderful dream sequence that highlights all of this beautifully. Like, it's not even digging into the nitty-gritty of the episode to yank symbolism out. Right in the start of the episode, you get a flashback reminding you what happened all those years ago. We have seen Hank grapple with facets of his guilt, his shame. This game broke his body and almost broke his spirit. And once he steals his resolve and joins up with his boys, they play, and sure enough, the Arlen boys win. Hank faced his fears and he got closure. It's also great to see him have his friends, to have his team. Much like Master of Puppets, I didn't appreciate this episode as a kid. I thought it was just Hank being super vain for the sake of being vain. But if you go through the series, it actually makes a ton of sense. Bois My Nose is unassuming at first, but the more you think on it, the more it shines. Season 13 is really just like that. You look back at it and you see all this closure, which does make the revival a little bit more tricky. You see all these stories getting proper bows and salutes. It's not like Arlen is shrinking or anything, more like the lights are starting to be turned off and things are winding down. Bois My Nose is a no nose, no glory, 9 out of 10. This is a wild intro to an episode. Peggy goes into a CD store looking for the latest cassette of the crooner Michael Bublé. The worker says that he thought people would be too embarrassed to buy a Michael Bublé CD unless they bought it online. Peggy didn't know online shopping even existed. Imagine that. Imagine being embarrassed by listening to Michael Bublé. It's weird. I know. Things change a lot in 15 years. Peggy realizes she's not hip anymore. Her groove has officially been thrown off. Meanwhile, Bobby begs Hank to take him to Cotillion so he can learn the rules of being a proper gentleman, and in a fun twist for Bobby, use it as a networking chance to meet new girls since he's soured his chances at Tom Landry. I mean, that feels like a Boomhauer move right there. Good on Bobby for playing some 4D chess. Peggy takes Bobby to one of his meetings and runs into coolness personified in fellow mom Kat Savage, played by special guest Kate Walsh of Grey's Anatomy Private Practice fame, and Umbrella Academy. Peggy wants to be cool, so she idolizes Kat, and Bobby flirts with Kat's daughter Michael. A daughter named Michael. Does her coolness know no bounds? Peggy tries to impress Kat when they get invited to Michael's party, and she and Bobby go to the party absolutely dripping in mad riz. Gen Z, I'm hip. Hit that subscribe button. Kat reveals the secret that she's absolutely miserable and her entire life is a lie. She chases fads and trends and that's her entire existence. She has to be on the ball 24/7 and she can't stand it, while Peggy envies every second of it. This episode is honestly aged beautifully. Make Kat an influencer in the modern age and her struggles have changed only minutely. Oh, yeah, the B story. Alright, the B story has not aged well. Honestly, kind of a fantasy idea in a post-2020 world. Hank finds a new bar and restaurant and falls in love with the food. The problem? Seating is first come, first serve, and you're going to get the seat you get and like it. He keeps trying to circumvent it by bringing his friends or having Octavio inadvertently invent DoorDash, bite taken out of his food before drop-off and all. He's a veritable propane-loving Nostradamus, I tell you what. Uncool Customer is fine. It's another perfectly middle-of-the-road episode that honestly, Peggy doesn't go like way overboard, just a little bit, just a smidge for Pegs. There's a surprising amount of control to Peggy this season. It's weird. It's like they're going back to normal Peggy. I'm for it, but it's noticed. Uncool Customer is a trendy 7 out of 10. Where Uncool Customer arguably aged really well, so did Nancy Does Dallas in an unfortunate way. Nancy does a story on a kid and his pet possum and brings up that this could have been worse if that kid was an assailant and not, a kid with a wacky animal companion. Well, her fervor about school safety has Tom Landry doing active bad guy drills and teaching students to protect themselves in case of an emergency, even having Coach Kleehammer have them yeet books at him. Nancy's reporting gets her called up to the big leagues in Dallas, while Hank tries to make sure Dale doesn't burn the house down while she's gone. Nancy goes to Dallas and gets swept up in the office politics with the new news team and goes just a wee bit power mad. She starts scheming to push them all out, and as she drinks and schemes in her wacky, schemy way, she climbs to the top of News Mountain for the parade, and then proceeds to drunkenly fall off and roll onto the street, ruining her chance at hitting the big leagues. Nancy comes home and starts putting out Dale fires and realizes that she belongs at her house with her boys. I know I said Hair Today, Gone Today was a perfect episode to walk away from Nancy on, and honestly, I deserve to kick my own ass for saying that. Nancy Does Dallas is the perfect end for Nancy's character and actually shows that Nancy needs Dale. We always see her paying the bills, fixing problems, and if she's away from Dale, she's throwing it back with John Redcorn. Here we see her realizing her professional dreams, and she slips up because she went mad with Power. Dale keeps her balanced. Dale is her guiding light. I don't know. The relationship isn't great, but it's theirs and it works for them. It's gotten to the point that you actually kind of cheer for Nancy, but also want to see her fail. Nancy has redeemed herself throughout the series, and this is the perfect catalyst to show that, hey, she's not perfect. She has her own problems just like anybody else. I also love how Hank gets really, antsy about what Dale is doing, because, yeah, he's always doing weird stuff, but it's a fun touch. Nancy Does Dallas is a breaking news 8 out of 10. Stephen Stanton would guest star this episode as Heck Dorland, the retired firefighter and leader of the Milton Street Group. It's 4th of July season, and Hank is gearing up to blow Milton Street away with the patriotic howl of rainy street celebrations. When Hank and Peggy go to church, Bobby wants to sleep in and decides to order pizza with money from his mom's purse. Hank and Peggy catch him and send him to experience Lucky's religion at a karate dojo. It's a good old Southern tent revival, just again in a dojo. Bobby repents so he is not tickled by the flames of damnation and is determined to share his new radical religious ways. Worshipping false idols? Well, we can't have that. Bobby, in a weird burst of evangelical rage, destroys the giant Uncle Sam Hank and the gang had been working on, because you should only love Jesus. Well, this starts a violent feud between Milton Street and Rainy Street until Bobby comes clean. So, couple things. 1. Lucky said he went to church at a bar, and he and Hank went drinking in the megachurch episode. Odd thing to do there. 2. This is just a paint-by-numbers Bobby episode. Bobby does thing. Bobby gets way overcorrected. Bobby learns moderation. End episode. I don't know. A feud between neighborhoods could really be something fun. They even bring back the firefighters from A Firefighting We Will Go. They put in all this extra detail, and it's honestly more boring than anything. I'll say this season, John Redcorn does a little bit of everything. Just like in this episode, he sells fireworks and Hank has to persuade him to give him the good stuff because he's not a narc. That's wonderful. There's solid comedy bits that make the episode worth watching for the first time, if only to get the memes, but otherwise, It just doesn't have any staying power. It has no revisitability. Born Again on the 4th of July is a smoldering 5 out of 10. Dee Dee drops off some of Cotton's things while Bobby wants to research about the family. Meanwhile, Dale and Bill get into a fight and break up as friends. Hank is responsible for completing Cotton's bucket list, and in doing so, he hopes that he can learn something about his dad and hopefully get some kind of closure. Con and Octavio help Dale and Bill split their possessions. Throughout the episode, you see Bobby trying to learn more about Hank, and Hank desperate to learn anything new about his dad. Peggy pushing him along every step of the way until he gets his dad's ashes and is ordered to pour the ashes down a toilet in a bar. The same toilet whose seat was warmed by the cheeks of the great General George S. Patton. However, the bar is aware of this weird ceremony and it clogs their pipes, so they stop Hank and throw him out. Hank fights for Bill and Dale to make up, and he and his gang work as a unit to pour Cotton's ashes down the toilet and flush him with pride. Hank pays without question to get the toilet fixed after their incident. Again, it's not the closure you expected, but unlike Death Picks Cotton, this closure, I don't know, it feels right. Cotton served in the trenches. He had slain 50 men. But through it all, he wasn't alone. He had his men, his brothers in arms that were running into the same gunfire he was. He was horrible to his family, but the respect forged between him and his friends was unwavering. And to see Hank see the importance of his friends is honestly good enough. These guys grew up together. They've been through everything together. And to see them all unite one more time to send Cotton off the way he admittedly does deserve is touching. Again, the season is all about closure, and this episode is a perfect example of that. The jokes are sharp, the character work is great, and I know I haven't said much about it really at all through the entire series, but it needs to be said, Mike Judge does a great job as Hank Hill. It's like saying Seth MacFarlane does a pretty good Peter Griffin, I know, but Hank wouldn't be who he is without Mike Judge. His cadence, his inflection, he was able to bring a character to life like no one else could, and I don't know, this episode really showcases that. Serves me right for giving General George S. Patton the bathroom key as a hard-fought 10 out of 10. It's baseball season again, and Hank is too embarrassed to have Bobby sign up for the local league, so he signs him up for a brand new one. Bill also finds a purpose at the new grounds and starts helping organize games and manage the park. Hank tries to temper the coach's expectations, and the coach just thinks Hank doesn't believe in his son. But the coach absolutely does. Bobby is going to be a star. The coach sees potential in all his players. Hank continuously gets shamed as Bobby starts to show incremental improvement that Hank misses while trying to help out on the grounds to earn privileges back. Oh, and then when he's playing catcher after sneaking away, he cold cocks a kid and gets banned. He still sneaks in to see Bobby play, and when Bobby starts to slip up and the team starts to exploit it, the coach refuses to pull him until Hank sneaks over and yanks Bobby out of there to save him from the embarrassment. It's very much a commentary on the argument between playing to win and playing to have fun. Bobby isn't good. He can try, he can grow, but sports just aren't his speed, and that's okay. Now granted, Hank didn't have to sign him up for anything, he chose to. The coach believes that Bobby can do incredible things and inflates his ego thinking he can live up to that, while Hank tries to keep Bobby realistic. He doesn't want his son's wax wings to melt flying too close to the sun. There's a special kind of love in Hank pulling Bobby before he can get embarrassed in front of everyone. Hank doesn't think his son's a failure or anything, he just knows he's not good at baseball and that's okay. Bill got a position of power and the power went straight to his head. The sun rises, the moon sets. 2 + 2 = 4. It's paint by numbers. If you've never seen it, watch it once, it's fine. Bad News Bill feels like it was made by a skeleton crew and just feels off. It's hard to explain. It's one step off of being a really solid episode. Bad News Bill is a pop fly 6 out of 10. At church, Luanne uses the Manger Babies to calm Gracie down and inadvertently calms all the babies down. She becomes determined to take the Manger Babies to the next level. John Redcorn recruits her to his children's entertainment empire and she starts taking off in popularity. Meanwhile, her climb inspires Dale to finally hammer out the final details to his kid's book he's been working on, The Magic Bullet, about a mom gun looking for her baby bullet. Yeah, that tracks. Luanne keeps doing the Manger Babies and they quickly lose hype. So to try and get her audience back, she adds in a brat doll and makes her act way edgier, even stealing the plot behind Dale's book to use for her puppets. Dale freaks out and throws Luanne's puppets into the washer and destroys them as vengeance. Luanne goes back to focusing all her attention on Gracie as she's reunited with Gurgle Gurgle, the octopus, and her daughter has her first 8-armed friend. This episode just is not it. It doesn't need to exist. It's there to just destroy the Manger Babies and move on. Like, I didn't love the Manger Babies, I would even say I hated them, but this was just an unnecessary episode. If it worked out for Luanne, that's great, and it gives her a way to be creative while supporting her family. But it didn't, and they make a point of guaranteeing it could never happen again. Manger Baby Einstein just doesn't do anything. It spins its wheels for one last Luanne episode and drops the ball every way it can. It's probably the only episode I don't have to think twice about saying you should skip it. It is nice to see Lucky with Gracie, but Your viewing experience is better if you don't even know this episode exists. Manger Baby Einstein is a conclusive 2 out of 10. Boomhauer does a house swap with a Canadian family and goes to Canada to find himself. Hank and the gang miss their buddy desperately and even get a beer cooler to set up an outside bar. Eventually they meet their new Canadian neighbors, Gordon and Maureen, and they're the most passive-aggressive syrup drinkers you ever did see. I know it's rambling, but it's the last season. It's my video, and I don't care. This episode is about Canadians moving in across the street from Hank. Gordon is played by David Herman doing a Canadian accent that sometimes slips into Irish and a little Russian, and it's just not maintainable. My problem with that is simple. King of the Hill has had a frequent guest star since as far back as season 3. Second City legend and strange brew aficionado, David Thomas. The only people more Canadian than Dave Thomas are like Wayne Gretzky and Wolverine. Get him to play the Canadian dad. Let him hoser it up. Instead, we get a Canadian that borders on Dracula half the time. I don't know. Seems like a whiff of a ball right over the plate. It should have been a home run. The episode had the elements to succeed, but it's just Hank in the neighborhood fighting with the Canadians. That's literally it. The resolution is, we get along because it's better than the Canadian being stuck in prison. Okay. Boomhauer meets Suzette and they fall for each other. That's nice. Doesn't do anything beyond that, but sure. Uh-oh, Canada feels like they lost a bet and had to write just the most nonsense episode of King of the Hill imaginable. Who is this for? Ha, that'll show those Canadians what? They just fight, and the writing never elevates their banter beyond, I know you are, but what am I? Enjoy 22 minutes of that. Enjoy 22 minutes of being poked in the rib and being reminded that this episode exists. Uh-oh, Canada is a 2 out of 10, and I think you should let that one marinate. I don't want to talk about this episode. I really, really don't. I just feel like I sold y'all a lemon. I'm over here saying, oh, best episode of the show. Oh, this season has so much closure. And then you get an episode like The Boy Can't Help It. I got nothing for you, gang. Bobby needs a date and runs into a group of girls in advanced placement who think Bobby is super cute. He thinks he's dating 3 girls. They think he's cute like a pet. That's it. That's everything you need to know. Oh, you want the B story? Hank and the gang build a new deluxe mega shopping cart for the local homeless guy to give him form and function in his wheeled storage unit. Bobby gets used for entertainment by smart girls, and Hank builds a mega cart. Neither of these ideas has enough meat to carry an episode, and I remember watching this episode just numb. The jokes are flat. It's one of the weakest Bobby episodes of all time, and it just feels like, and they call it Bobby love without the satisfying conclusion. An almost identical build-up, just 3 girls instead of 1, and then the whole thing just, oops, falls apart. I can't even tell you what Hank is upset about. That Bobby is being emasculated by the girls since they do everything? I guess? He's married to Peggy. What? The Boy Can't Help It is a perfectly skippable and not worth talking about 2 out of 10. Alright, so we're gonna do these a little out of order. We're gonna go on some uncharted territory here. I promise this will make sense in the long run. It's alright, we're almost done. Finish strong. Hank calls his mom Tilly, who funnily enough in her last episode will be played by returning great Beth Grant. Tilly tells Hank she broke up with Gary weeks ago because he was snooping and found out about her affair with Chuck Garrison, her new fiancé, played by William Devane, a famed legend of screen and cinema. Already off to a great start. Hank is understandably suspicious of Chuck when they go to visit Tilly for the wedding, but he seems genuinely nice and like a great guy for Tilly. And when they're least expecting it, the newlyweds peel down Rainy Street in an RV. Chuck beyond stressed by the new purchase. Turns out Tilly is a bit of a rebel who likes living life on the edge. Chuck is tired of her acting out, and Hank realizes it wasn't Chuck that was the problem as Tilly drives off in the RV. It was his own mom. And now Hank and the gang have to hunt her down. As they look for Tilly, Hank and Chuck bond, and by the end, Tilly and Chuck are heading to the Mark Twain Festival, towing Hank's truck behind their RV while he's left in the rain watching them drive off with his ride because they forgot to unhitch it. I'd say classic Tilly, but we've only seen her like 6 times. I get that they probably couldn't get Carl Reiner back to play Gary, but man, talk about an unceremonious write-off. Man got kicked off the balcony and swept under 10,000 rugs. Chuck is fine. I guess knowing there's only like 4 episodes after this makes all this inconsequential. It's the first of the never aired on Fox episodes, and it's perfectly okay. It's funny that one of the last episodes is a Tilly episode of all things, but hey, I don't hate it. It gives her personality, and it's great seeing Beth Grant take her for one last spin. The Honeymooners is a sun-setting 7 out of 10. Bill decides that he wants a roommate so that he can get into wacky adventures. Bobby and Joseph hear about legends at the school and decide to come back at night to investigate to see if it's actually haunted, and when they hear rattling, they decide to check in and sneak around until they find the diabolical supernatural source, Principal Moss. Principal Moss has been living in the school and needs a place to stay, so Hank tells Bill he's got that roommate he always wanted, and wacky hijinks ensue. A former Playboy buddy moves in. Principal Moss has no respect for Bill's stuff and will happily treat him like trash. A black market munition salesman named Yuri moves into a U.S. Army officer's house. I'm sure that won't sound any alarms. And as Bill loses control of his house to his nightmare roommates, he has Octavio and Octavio's brothers move in so he has a majority vote and eventually scares Moss and the rest of them away. Okay. Where No Bobby Left Behind is the best Principal Moss episode, this is arguably the worst. Moss just doesn't work for this idea, and the episode just feels like they didn't know how to wrap it or add anything in. I have to wonder if they got to pick which episodes aired and which ones didn't, because if they did, gonna be honest, I get why this one didn't. This one is not it. Bill Gathers Moss is skippable other than being able to say you saw the episodes that never aired on Fox. Do it once so you can say you did and then skip it and never look back. Bill Gathers Moss is one odd couple of a 2 out of 10. Min and Connie are going back home to Laos to visit, leaving Con on his own. Min asks Hank to look after Con and make sure that he gets his medication and does everything right. Con has manic bipolar disorder. However, while they're at the grocery, Hank tells Con he doesn't need his prescription if all it does is balance him out, and that he'll be just fine. Con also agrees to build a giant super grill for Strickland Propane and gets to work with a manic energy. Just absolutely shredding through progress, and then he crashes hard because, yeah, that's what happened. And coach-esque violent therapy to no avail because, fun fact, mental issues sometimes need medication to help. Hank works to get Con his meds and tries to get him to balance out, but thankfully he has one last big burst of manic energy to finish the grill project and deliver on his promise. The B story has Bobby finding a Ray J comedy album and listening to it over and over, trying to get why it's funny. No one can explain to him why it's funny, it just is. If you can explain to me why it's funny, please, I'm begging you, comment below. I need to know. I have seen this episode easily over 15 times, and I cannot tell you why what he's saying is funny. Which I feel like that's the joke, and the fact that I'm tossing and turning trying to decipher this nonsense makes me the ultimate clown. Just Another Manic Con Day is a solid Con episode that gives us more info on everyone's favorite systems analyst. It's a good send-off for Con, and it's great to see him working with Hank and having a camaraderie they wouldn't have had back in Season 1. They're real neighbors now, but more importantly, real true friends. I will say I'm a little upset we didn't get a final adventure for Min, but more importantly, Connie. She hasn't had anything to do and just sort of gets pushed out, and it's not right. Just Another Manic Con Day is a chaotic energy-powered 8 out of 10. Why? Skip this episode. Let Nancy Does Dallas give you the perfect wrap-up on House Gribble. Joseph has a girlfriend, Lori, who wants to take things further. They get caught making out by Principal Moss while Bobby tried to guard the door and Dale tries to give Joseph the talk. But when he can't, he goes online and takes a test that tells him that he has dementia. So he checks himself into a mental institution led by Mike Patel, played by special guest star Asif Mandivi. Nancy is doing something. I don't care. No, she gets into this feud with Miguel Hernandez, who the show can't even figure out if he's coming or going. Some seasons he's at the disc, some seasons he isn't. No rhyme or reason. It never mattered. She starts trying to one-up Miguel's stories and eventually uses Dale to raise dementia awareness. Dale has to act crazy so that Mike will send him to a proper mental hospital where he can get the care he needs, and he goes to the state-run mental hospital and is still there as the episode ends. Why? You keep going with the Gribbles for this? This was worth it? I'm tired, viewers, so tired. We have just one more episode left in the entire show. This season really could have been 20 episodes and been fine. Just Another Manic Con Day is the strongest of the 4 unreleased episodes, and I personally would say When Joseph Met Lori and Made Out is easily the worst. Bill Gathers Moss being a close third. It doesn't wrap Joseph's story and actively takes the focus away from him. Nancy is being petty and nonsensical, and Dale is, Dale at almost his worst. And I think the worst problem is Joseph never really gets any proper time in the spotlight. It's like they knew to just keep him away from it. It's kind of disappointing. Like, we know who Connie is, we know who Bobby is. We never really get to see Joseph just be Joseph. The episode is nothing worth watching. When Joseph Met Lori and Made Out is a painful burning sensation of a 1 out of 10. And here we are, the series finale. I want to talk about the unreleased episodes first because, this is it. This, at the time of writing this script, is the last episode of King of the Hill, and would be for 15 years. Bobby and Hank go out to an awkward dinner, and Bobby points out that there's something wrong with their steak. Hank tries to chide him to not say anything, but sure enough, Bobby was right. Bobby is a meat aficionado, in no small part thanks to Hank teaching him via in utero meat studies. He attracts the coach of the Heimlich County University meat examination team, who invites the child to join his college team. And yeah, Bobby has to train to compete in the cutthroat world of meat examination. Funnily enough, Duff Goldman, the ace of cakes himself, would guest star. A guest star that is almost as shocking as Guy Fieri in The Great North. The Great North! Someone's watching it. The team is vicious, and if you make one wrong move, they will harass you for it and talk down to you. Bobby screws up and they lose their faith in him. He wants to run away, but Hank convinces him to keep fighting, so he gets ready for the next big event. And as the bus is being taken to the venue, the rival school steals the bus and drives it off so the team can't compete. But Bobby wasn't on the bus, so he has to compete solo and represent the entire team and hope that he doesn't mess up. And without his teammates judging his every little action, he actually does really, really well and manages to get them to the finals when his teammates arrive and try and push him out. But Hank encourages him and he fights back and stands up for himself, believing that he's right, and he is. They win. And yet that's not the point of the episode. It's fine and all, and a perfectly decent Bobby episode. But after that, after all of that, Bobby is grilling steaks with his dad. His dad that had supported him throughout this entire episode. His dad that is so proud of him. This is where we end. This is where their relationship stands at the end of the series. The neighborhood smells those propane-cooked, glistening masterpieces, and slowly but surely, everyone heads to Hill House. Boomhauer's wallet opens up and shows a Texas Ranger badge, which either it's fake and he's impersonating a cop, which is a crime, or it's real, and if you think back on everything, it doesn't necessarily fit, but who cares? It's fun enough. Everyone sits down to eat the meat that this father and son duo have cooked together. They say yep, and the episode pans up to the water tower and fades away. If you have to end a series, to sirloin with love is how you do it. Unlike Lucky's wedding suit, the main story is actually engaging and gives you something to play off of. Bobby has a talent for something that Hank is actually fascinated by, and Hank nurtures it. It's just a good father-son adventure that cements that from episode 1 to now, Hank has always loved his boy. He has always loved his friends, his wife, his community. To Sirloin with Love is as close to a perfect finale as you're ever going to get, and it feels refreshing and cleansing in a way as the screen fades one last time in an homage to the first episode. To Sirloin with Love is a USDA A5 Wagyu 10 out of 10. Well, there we have it. That's season 13, and with it, the end of the original run of King of the Hill. Obviously, at the time of writing this, the new series is in active development, but with several main cast members no longer with us, it may be King of the Hill, but it will never truly be the same. Season 13 was a huge toss-up where you got some of the best episodes of the show and some of the most middling things you've ever been forced to sit through. King of the Hill has had a bumpy road, but no one can ignore the impact it had. Season 13 was a season all about going out on a high note. And so I'll ask just one last time. What was your favorite episode? Least favorite? Anything you think I was right on, wrong on? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like what you saw, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends we're out here. This has been a wild journey, and I can't thank you all enough for watching. Whether you're watching this in my standalone video or in the Marathon Beast that's coming soon, just know that I appreciate you. Stay strong and keep fighting that good fight. And when a new dawn rises and a new show is begging to be reviewed, I'll be there. So for now, goodbye everybody, and I'll see you next time.